Kansei, Anin. I welcome all our panelists, as well as our leadership and all my relations that are online. I want to extend a thank you to our Children Our Way Society for hosting this webinar. My name is Esquia Gapipin Masqua, also AKA Karen Palche. I'm the Director of Child Welfare and Social Development for FSIN, and I come to you, my relatives, from Treaty 6 territory in what is known as Saskatoon. We have a lot of information to share today with you, but first we will take a moment and I'll open with a prayer. I ask that you pray with me in your own way, and as well, if there's anything that you need today to help you to get through the day, please ask the Creator for that. So I pray to the Creator for our most vulnerable, the little ones. I pray for the frail ones, the houseless ones, the ones with mental health problems, those with addictions, and those that are suffering the loss of loved ones. Today, we must give thanks to our ancestors for being strong and smart and highly motivated to fight for our inherent treaty rights. We thank them for thinking 7 generations ahead, for they gave us today. We ask for that same strength to do the same kind of work that we continue to fight for on our own island. We give thanks to the Creator for giving us that capacity to be here right now, to learn, to walk together, and to pick each other up when needed. Let us support each other across Turtle Island so we can do the work that is needed for our children. Miigwech, Tanigi, Mercy Chow, hi hi. Today, our panelists are Chief Erica Beaudin of the Cowsas First Nation. She is also the National Chiefs Children Commission for the area known as Saskatchewan region. She is a strong, long-time leader for our women, our children, our missing persons, and their families, and the homeless. Our next panelist, Chief Beaudin will provide you with an overview of how the regional realities are addressed within the Love and Justice Plan and the Canada Plan. Our next speaker after that will be Dr. Cindy Blackstock. She's the Executive Director of the Caring Society. Cindy was unable to join us this morning, and because she is attending the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal in Ottawa. They're having hearings today. She did record a presentation for us, and we will share that recording after Chief Beaudin's presentation. Dr. Blackstock will give us a more detailed look at how the 2 plans address the different needs in regions across Turtle Island. We also have online with us today Richard Gray and Tracy Lavin. They are 2 members of our National Children's Chiefs Commission technical team. Richard and Tracy will chime in if needed during the question and answer portion of our webinar today. Before I turn to our panelists, there's just a few housekeeping points that I'd like to make. This session is being recorded and will be available on our Children Our Way website. We do have French interpreters available on a separate channel for our Francophone participants. We will try to save time for questions at the end, so please type your questions in the chat and I will read them out to our panelists. Finally, we will be hosting 2 more webinars over the next few weeks to dig into the details of both the Love and Justice and the Canada Plan. The next webinar is in 2 weeks and will focus on funding in the Love and Justice and the Canada Plan. I will now turn to Chief Beaudin to introduce herself and to talk to us about regional difference in the Love and Justice and Canada Plan. I welcome Chief Erica Beaudin. Excuse me, Chief Erica Beaudin, we need your mic and your video on, please. Thank you. Great.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone else. I bid you a warm welcome from the homelands of Cowsas First Nation in Treaty 4 territory. We have an absolute wonderful, although a bit windy day, as we say in our Nihawiak language. It's Yotin. Brother wind is come today, and we are expecting a storm later on. Now, on behalf of the commissioners, it is my absolute honor to present today. And I am just looking here, and if you just give me one moment. My apologies here. I am having a little bit of technical my notes are a little bit different than the ones that are on the screen right now, Karen.
Okay,
I have just the plan overview regional perspectives here, and then we have discrimination in, okay, thank you. What are their parameters? There we go. Thank you very much. I just had the wrong screen. So in front of you, you have the screen. What are the parameters and the goals of the regional negotiations? First of all, I want to not only thank Karen for the prayer, but also thank all of the other commissioners, but especially the technical people that are working on our plan. Our technical people have hundreds of years of experience in the area of the front line, working with our kids. And I'm so proud to sit as one of the commissioners alongside the sisters and brothers as we have become in our quest for equity and equality in ensuring that our children, and we feel that all Indigenous children are our children, and how we have worked together amongst sometimes very, very brutal conditions in exacting this loving justice. But as we say, what we go through as advocates and as the ones that are ensuring that our efforts don't go unchecked are nothing compared to what some of our children go through, including loss of life, including our families, our mothers, our fathers, our kokums, our mushums, who have to go through all of what they go through with the system that we are. In what we are doing, our only intent is that our children live that Miopamatsuin, which in our language is that good life that Creator has meant for all of us. And that is our bottom line. In the work that we have done since we have been given the mandate by the other chiefs in assembly at the Assembly First Nations has been to work without ego, to work only with the role in mind that if we were in our most vulnerable position and these were our children and grandchildren, and we were unable to be in that position to help our children and grandchildren go through tough times, that we would be able to feel confident that the system that our children and grandchildren are placed in would be a good, loving, caring, just place until our families could be reunited again. We are very proud of the work that we have done. As I said, we have worked under very, very difficult conditions. However, the love, every single word that you see, every thought has been done with prayer, ceremony, and has been worked on with only the best intentions under very trying circumstances. But like our elders, our Kateyak say, it's tough for us to be born into this life, but it is a beautiful life, and we must do whatever we can to ensure that the lives yet to come, and even the little lives and the lives of the mothers, fathers, kokums, mushums, the ones that are the caregivers now, that we do our best in order for them to be able to care for our children in the best way possible. So with that, I will start the presentation. We have had already at least one webinar where we have already discussed the different what is different about our plan, as in what has been there with the first plan that the chiefs had voted down, which we knew that would not be, it would only be putting together another broken system that was already broken. And then we saw what Canada is looking at, which is basically another broken system. These are our best attempts to put together a system that, while under an umbrella, has regional areas, as in our provinces and our territories, what we need, because we realize that we are not all the same, that our children are not all the same, that our families aren't all the same, that our environments aren't all the same, that even the provincial ministries that we work with are not all the same. The provincial governments are not all the same. And with under us all understanding that, which is the importance of us having the technicians from each of the regions, the commissioners from each of the regions, for us all to work together with the technical people, with the parents, with the youth, with the Katayak, the elders, in order to put together the best plan possible, so that not only are we at a total, what is now Canada level, but also in each of our regions, that this best meets the needs of our children and families. Now to start, and I apologize, I have a little bit of a frog in my throat this morning. Canada's plan says the government views direct negotiations with regional representatives of rights holders as the best way forward. Last fall, Canada told the CRT it refused to continue discussions with the nations because there was no point in further discussions. That is an actual quote from Canada's submission. They also said that 4 months was not enough time to engage with the nations, even if they were inclined to do so. And yet, the NCCC and the Caring Society worked together without funding to make sure the nations all had a chance to have their say in that short period of time. Canada has said they are making negotiations with regions a priority in their plan, but they are not willing to accept amendments to it, and they will only negotiate with regions until September 30th of this year. To be clear, regions do not need the CHRT to approve any agreement they sign with Canada. It is only when those agreements are put in front of the CHRT that they potentially impact the legal minimums that Canada must meet. The government's goal is to get regions to sign agreements before the CHRT has had a chance to make it a ruling on the two plans currently before it. The Loving Justice Plan also requires Canada to discuss regional variations within 6 months, but only after the protections of CHRT orders on minimum standards are in place. The tribunal has a 10-year history of increasing the resources we are able to access to support our kids. And after all this time, we think, and in fact, we know it is worth this small wait. Canada has already agreed that the CHRT hearing process on the plans that have been put forward should be complete by this year. By waiting until there are legal guardrails in place, the regional discussions are expected to be much more fruitful. The plan overview, regional perspectives. Both plans submitted to the CHRT are technically national plans within regional variations. As always, the details are what matters. This is especially true when it comes to the ability of nations in different regions to make sure their children are properly supported. There are 5 major areas or details to consider when on-the-ground realities in each region run into the Loving Justice Plan and Canada's plan. They are: what can be negotiated or changed over time? What types of decisions can rights holders make? By rights holders, we mean we as First Nations who are ultimately responsible for our children and families. What kinds of decisions can Canada make? And how will each plan make sure non-delegated nations are able to hold Canada accountable for the activities they fund through the provinces? And finally, how can nations in each region hold Canada accountable to make sure that discrimination stops and does not happen again? What aspects of CFS would be up for discussion under each plan at the regional level? We know, and Canada knows, that regions want to have a chance to ensure their unique situations are taken into consideration. The difference is in the nature of what is being considered. The type of discussion Canada has committed to is limited to administrative functions. Who among the nations and agencies will be directing the data collection and reporting, and how and when they will transmit that information to Canada for consideration for the program after the 7-year term. Canada has made it very clear in their plan that the types of activities that get funded and the amount of funding available to each region is not, and I repeat, not up for negotiation. They even underline the word not on page 7. The structure of Canada's plan will pit nation against nation and nations against their agencies to a larger degree than what exists now. The Loving Justice Plan tries to build strength between the nations by building strong lines of mutual support and information sharing between nations at all levels of capacity. The regional technical and secretariat tables are supported by a national technical and secretarial hub that will work to build capacity and share best practices across the nations. The National Governance Committee will actively hold Canada to account on any new piece of legislation or policy Canada proposes based on the analysis at the regional tables. This is a much cleaner process than what is in place even now. Rather than have AFN having to rely on the chiefs to pass resolutions directing action twice a year, the nations can have ongoing and active say in the recommendations sent to Canada in a timely manner. I will talk more about this in a moment, but more details about this governance and accountability framework are also available in our last webinar, which is posted on the NCCC website and the Our Children, Our Way YouTube channel. The types of discussions to address regional differences are also more meaningful under the Loving Justice Plan. Every community has its own history, its own requirements for how substantive equity needs to be put in place. Every agreement Canada has in place with the provinces and the Yukon also leave impacts. While nations can also discuss the administrative processes Canada's negotiations are going to cover, the Loving Justice Plan insists on making those discussions worth the nation's time. Pardon me. What types of decisions can rights holders make to reflect regional realities? The goals of regional negotiations. Canada has indicated a preference for negotiating regional agreements along provincial and territorial boundaries, but it is willing to consider other regional boundaries if colonial lines prove impossible to negotiate within. The Loving Justice holds space for variations as local as the community level to ensure that children are supported in a way that creates substantive equality. Governance. Under Canada's national framework, each regional agreement would include a regional governance scheme for the purpose of overseeing implementation of the First Nations Child and Family Services program in that region. This would include a regional governance committee and a secretariat in each region. Regional negotiations within the context of Canada's national framework would allow First Nations an opportunity to create their own regional reporting, planning, and governance frameworks to help shape implementation of the First Nations Child and Family Services program to their distinct needs and circumstances. Under the Loving Justice Plan, each region would have a dedicated technical table and a regional secretariat who would not only be monitoring the implementation of the reformed CFS program, but would be actively working to increase capacity in the communities at any level the community is at. Regional governance structures would also inform region-specific First Nations Family and Children's Child Family Services program assessments and recommendations for adjustments moving forward. The funding aspect. During regional negotiations, rights holders would be asked to make decisions around prevention, post-majority, and household support funding is split between nations and agencies in that region. Nations would also be asked to decide how the top-up funding would be split between IT, emergency funding, and results funding. Results funding is money for data analysis. All three would come from an amount representing 13% of an agency's baseline funding, and it would be up to the nations to decide how much of that 13% to use for each item. Regional variations under the Loving Justice framework will include ensuring that children have the types and amounts of the resources they need, but in a different way. Many of these variations will be built over time because the Loving Justice Plan insists that activities are funded at actual cost until such time that there is enough clear and measurable data to be able to make decisions in not only a good way, but the best way possible. For the data, Loving Justice also insists that all data collected is handled according to OCAP principles. Canada's national framework terms and conditions would require certain reporting from nations and agencies, but the region could choose to add these reporting requirements if they wanted to. What types of discretion does Canada maintain? There are very few areas where Canada retains sole discretion under the Loving Justice Plan. There are guardrails built in at every stage because even after 10 years of being under active CHRT direction, they have not demonstrated they are able to avoid discrimination. The dispute resolution process under Canada's plan is limited to a nation's dissatisfaction of how their region is implementing their regional agreement and the concern a nation or agency might have over how their funding was allocated or administered within their region. It would be based off the dispute resolution process created for the Ontario Final Agreement, and Canada would appoint what they call a president or select adjudicators until such time as they could develop and pass legislation outlining the permanent dispute resolution process. There is no requirement for Canada to accept the region's recommendations for future reform, and in the meantime, the process for approvals of capital infrastructure will revert to a proposal-based process in line with ISC's standard capital approval for on-reserve infrastructure. There are no mechanisms for regions to advocate for different funding streams to meet their distinct needs or to ensure that funding amounts discussed by IFSD are appropriate for those nations that have not yet had a chance to fully identify the needs of their communities. Canada's agreements with provinces in the Yukon. Canada's plan mentions the government's willingness to make best efforts to amend their funding agreements with provinces in the Yukon. Best efforts is a term used in relation to all provincial agreement aspects, including the actual inclusion of rights holders in the creation of governance and accountability mechanisms within these agreements, data collection, and reporting by the provincial or territorial governments, and the public release of the funding amounts. Words have power, and Canada's words in their proposed way forward do not bind them to action. Could in a legal submission typically means the potential for this to happen exists. The term will is used where the outcome is a certainty and the party writing the words is committed to action. If Canada failed to reach an agreement with the provincial or Yukon government, its plan says it would discuss possible solutions with the governance body. It isn't clear where such discussions might lead because the nations have no ability to direct the provinces to renegotiate, or we know they would have done that years ago. The Loving Justice Framework asks the CHRT to bind Canada to a required set of actions. They cannot discriminate through negligence, so Loving Justice asks they be required to ensure all of the activities they are funding are in line with the principles put forth by the nations. In order to make sure the agreements are funding the right things, the same measurement systems, must be in place for provincial activities as are in place for the nations and agencies. The data they collect must be both protected and shared with the nations whose families are impacted. Next slide, please. Holding Canada accountable. The largest and most meaningful difference between the two plans is where the voices of the nations and the role of the CHRT collide. Under Canada's plan, the regions could make recommendations to remove any remaining or new discrimination in the CFS program at the end of the 7-year term and also somewhere in the middle of the agreement term. None of these recommendations have to be accepted by Canada. They just have to explain why they chose not to implement them. The CHRT will no longer have jurisdiction over the First Nations Child and Family Services Program because Canada has asked the CHRT to approve their plan as a replacement for the CHRT orders that have forced them into action since 2016. What is truly concerning is that this would appear to include 2016 CHR2, which was the original confirmation by the tribunal that Canada was discriminating against our children. The Loving Justice Plan creates a fundamental shift in the ability of Canada to recreate the discrimination. It supports the creation of capacity at the community, agency, and technical levels and keeps a constant eye on Canada's policy framework before any new program components can be put into place. It makes sure that any issues are fixed before they cause issues at the level of the child. And it keeps the CHRT as a guardrail to Canada's failure until such times as Canada is able to demonstrate to the CHRT and to the nations that the discrimination has been removed. The minimum amount of time the CHRT will retain jurisdiction is 5 years. The maximum depends on Canada and most importantly, with our relationship and the honor of the Crown. Thank you.
Great for your words, Chief Beaudin. We will address any questions at the very end. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Now let's turn to Dr. Blackstock. As mentioned earlier, Dr. Blackstock had another commitment today, but she's recorded a presentation for us. Miigwech.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Blackstock, and I am Gitsan, and it's a real honor to join you today for the National Children's Chiefs Commission webinar series. In this series, we are comparing Canada's plan to permanently end its own discrimination in First Nations Child and Family Services to the First Nations-led plan, which is called Loving Justice. This series, we're going to be focusing in on specific types of topics, and today's topic is regional approaches. But to really understand Loving Justice and Canada's approach, we highly recommend you read both plans, which are available on the National Children's Chiefs Commission website or on fnwitness.ca, and then also look at the rest of the webinar series. So here we go. I begin with a disclosure. I am the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, and we are a co-complainant along with the Assembly of First Nations in the landmark human rights case on First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's Principle. And as we talk about what this case is about, the permanent goal is to end the discrimination that was found by the tribunal in First Nations Child and Family Services. We'll be talking about Jordan's Principle as that we do that work to create that First Nations-led plan to permanently end that discrimination, but that's going to be done later. The other thing that I would say is that what we're presenting here are summaries of analysis. And for you to get the full benefit, please read the original documents and, of course, get your experts to do their due diligence in looking at what their analysis might be. So again, we're talking about the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal case, and it's really that permanently ending Canada's discrimination. I underline that because that's really the jurisdiction of the tribunal, is to stop Canada's discrimination. There are other forms of discrimination that might happen in child welfare that might be a result of, for example, provincial laws or other things. The tribunal cannot order the provinces to do anything. So we're talking about Canada's stopping discrimination and how we do that. In the first area of topic, which is First Nations Child and Family Services, Jordan's Principle will be dealt with later. So what are Canada's plan and Loving Justice? Well, they all come from an order that was handed by the tribunal in August of 2025. It's called 2025 CHRT 80 for those of you wanting to look it up. And in that order, the tribunal set down some minimum standards that need to be upheld in these plans and ordered the Caring Society and AFN to work with the National Children's Chiefs Commission to file a First Nations-led plan. It encouraged Canada to join us in that endeavor, but Canada refused to do that. So it created its own separate plan, and that's how we have two different plans. I should say that Canada's plan was created by Canada. We don't know of any First Nations input into that plan. In Loving Justice, by comparison, is a First Nations-led plan that was overseen by the National Children's Chiefs Commission, which of course was formed by resolution of First Nations and Assembly. And we received over 100 submissions by First Nations, by their regional organizations, and their experts. And that whole plan is really First Nations driven and aligned with the resolutions of Chiefs and Assembly. So one of the things I want to start out with, even in this topic of regional agreements, is which plan really respects First Nations rights. So when we look at the Loving Justice Plan, because it was developed by First Nations, designed by First Nations, it really is the stronger approach in terms of respecting First Nations rights. It sets national minimum standards, but those are safeguards to First Nations children's rights. It's not an imposed solution that's kind of bureaucratic or administrative. And there are allowances for regional variations on top of that. The governance, the design, the oversight is all done by First Nations rights holders. There's data sovereignty, public reporting and transparency, and First Nations control and strong enforcement measures that are multi-layered. You can look at our enforcement video to learn more about that. In Canada's plan, as I said, we don't know of any known First Nations input into that plan. The national plan was created by Canada, and although it acknowledges First Nations rights, and children's rights, it really has weak enforcement to that. So it really is left largely to the goodwill of Canada itself. There are regional governance bodies, but as we'll get into details later, their main role is advisory to Canada, with Canada holding the ultimate decision power. And there are consultation and negotiations that are referenced throughout the plan, but again, Canada retains significant control. And what we have seen in the past is that when Canada does these region by region approaches in child and family services, they can end up creating a lot of fragmentation and unequal results for children across the country. And another piece that we'll be tackling later is that if you don't agree with Canada's approach, or if Canada does not get an agreement on its terms by April 1st, 2027, then Canada is unilaterally going to impose a solution on First Nations, and we do not agree with that approach clearly. So when you look at which plan gives most control to First Nations, Loving Justice gives much more control to First Nations, far less to Canada. Now, it is important to recognize that Canada, because of the way the laws are structured and that they hold the money, they do need to have some level of control, but that needs to be limited, and their discretion needs to be guided by principles that ensure that there are no derogations of children's rights to be free of discrimination. Then we have the national plan as Canada put over there. Now, I have moderate here. I think that's a generous view, but at least it's saying it recognizes this, that it's important. But in practice, as we'll get into later in the regional agreements, at the end of the day, it's really Canada making the decision making. And that's why we have a high degree of control for Canada. And as a comparison, when you look at the Ontario final agreement, it really largely replicates the national plan, with Canada again having high discretion over key aspects of the agreement. There is a lot that is not open to negotiation in Canada's plan. So when we talk about our regional variations, we're talking about regional agreements that build on national minimum standards that were developed and designed by First Nations and that align with the tribunal's orders. We want those minimum national standards so they can't be negotiated away. Indeed, that's exactly how UNDRIP was advocated for by First Nations across the country, to create that minimum national floor, but then to allow enrichment on top of that to meet the realities and distinct needs. Regional variations exist to strengthen, not to limit, and there can't be any negotiation away by Canada or putting pressure on maybe perhaps smaller regions to accept less. Sorry about that. These negotiations are First Nations led and governed in the regions. They're rights-based. They have to align with honor of the Crown and something called the duty of diligent implementation, which comes from Supreme Court decisions. You can look that up. And the key goal is to remedy ongoing discrimination and to, if it happens again, to prevent that recurrence, But if it happens again, we need to have meaningful enforcement, not just program management. It's not meant to do that. So what's off the table of negotiation? Sometimes it's good to have things that are off the table, which is those minimum standards, i.e. Canada can't discriminate for multiple generations. That's right in the tribunal's order. So that's important to have it off the table. Minimum funding levels. We want regions to build on top of those levels, not for those levels to go down. Accountability, there's going to be ongoing tribunal jurisdiction that's proposed in Loving Justice, multi-layered accountability mechanisms and monitoring mechanisms. Those are all required. And that flows into the governance oversight, which is consistent with the resolutions of Chiefs and Assembly that it be First Nations led. So what's on the negotiation in these regional agreements? Regional variations to address things like geography, culture, capacity. Maybe you got a unique service model in your region. So those elements can be negotiated. And what we've said there is that those negotiations have to be done by Canada in a way that is honoring of the Crown in duty of diligent implementation, and also has key aspects at remedying the discrimination in child and family, strengthening of funding levels, or adapting above the national standards. Those are all things that are there. And of course, the Loving Justice Plan allows for regional governance and regional secretariats and oversight. That's all within those negotiation parameters. So for Canada, what's off the table? Well, Canada has a core plan, national plan, where it's decided funding levels, the terms and conditions of the funding approaches or formulas. All those are non-negotiable. Tribunal orders, they want them to what's called satisfied, superseded, and replaced. And that means that they really, technically, they would go away, and that the tribunal would have no further oversight over Canada's conduct. What that means on the ground is no more tribunal orders to force Canada to do things that would stop its discrimination. Canada retains significant decision-making. Often First Nations are relegated to advisory roles to Canada. And then here's the important piece is that Canada says, if you don't have an agreement with us on our terms by April 1st, 2027, you just get the approach that we designed for you. So what about Loving Justice regional timelines? Well, one of the things we'd recommend right now is regions meet and identify their region-specific needs. Many regions have already done this work. What are the solutions that the tribunal could order that are necessary to end Canada's discrimination in child and family services? So all that work can begin right now. If the tribunal approves Loving Justice, which we hope it will, there are other timeframes that oblige Canada to come to the table in your region within 0 to 6 months to begin negotiating in good faith with the national standards as the floor. And if Canada doesn't do that, then First Nations are free to submit their own plan. So Canada doesn't hold all the power on timing here. And that there is no disruption of regional processes unless a regional decides otherwise. Some regions have well-established leadership and expert tables, and they work well together, and that's working well with the region. There's no intention in this plan to disrupt that. But there is flexibility if folks would like to develop something different or adapt what they have. So what's on the table on Canada's negotiation? Funding allocations within the region. So they've got a specific pool of money. They'll talk to you about who gets what money, First Nations agencies, for example. You can talk about how to implement their plan, how to report on it, those types of things, largely administrative. Regional governance bodies are provided for in the plan, which is a good thing. But largely it's to provide advice to the ISK, to Canada, and make recommendations and inform program assessments. But that's why we have that note at the bottom. Read the fine print. If you're reading it as we're reading it, Canada still retains ultimate decision making over many of the key factors and significant discretion on whether it would discharge its responsibilities or even take up these recommendations that are made by regional First Nations bodies. So what is this default plan I've been talking about? Well, in the regions, as I said, if you don't reach this agreement, Canada will impose its national framework. And in our view, this is likely to incentivize regional agreements and to introduce negotiation pressure. We have some concerns about that, obviously. For us, that doesn't really align with free, prior, and informed consent. You may want to look more deeply into that question. And the other thing that Canada says in its plan is it really wants one of these agreements per region, if possible. And you can see there, this is a section of their plan. It's on pages 5 and 6 of their national plan, where you can find this note that if there is no agreement, then Canada's national plan goes forward. So it's a very tight time frame for getting these agreements. So right in the submission on December 22nd, 2025, where they filed this plan, they say regions can apply for funding proposals for these negotiations with Canada. And then these negotiations also began last month. And all these agreements are supposed to be wrapped up by September 30th, with the federal government filing them with the tribunal on October 5th. And then they would take effect on April 1st, 2027. So I want to come back to this whole idea of take this agreement on our terms, or you're going to get the agreement we designed for you that's really at the bedrock of Canada's regional approach. And I just want to remind everyone of what the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples says about this. I think it's Article 19. On free, prior, and informed consent. So it really requires that the free part be no coercion. Like you're making the decision because you feel it's the best decision and approach for your nation and your community. Prior is that you need to have some input before the decision is made. For example, in Loving Justice, First Nations and their experts had input into the actual design of Loving Justice. Informed is that you have a chance to look at all the impacts of this, the pros and cons, etc. And consent, it's not just consultation, it's consent. So that's what UNDRIP requires. And we would really encourage you to look at Canada's plan and looking at Loving Justice and compare them against this UNDRIP standard. So overall, when we look at the regional approaches, under Canada's plan, regionalization is present. In fact, for example, I think they're really largely relying on regional agreements. And that is a departure from what the tribunal really has been emphasizing over the years, which is a national agreement with regional adaptations. Canada retains the final say on a large number of these funding decisions, minimum standards, timelines, that kind of stuff. And regional governance exists, but is advisory and largely subject to federal approval. Under Loving Justice, again, we have those binding, and that's a key word because that means they can be enforced if Canada backslides. Minimum national standards that are really rights affirming for First Nations and for their children. Regions have the right to develop, propose, and implement their own regional variations on top of those minimum standards to make it even better. And regional governance is First Nations led, with chiefs, elders, youth, technical experts, and others participating in the decision making. So look at our enforcement video on more about this, but when you're talking about regional agreements, you want to make sure that the agreement that you get is actually going to be something that's honored and implemented. So do take a look at the multiple levels and multiple layers of accountability and enforceability in loving justice. This is just a quick summary slide. And compare that in Canada's plan, where the tribunal goes away. There is an allowance for a national dispute tribunal to be created through legislation, but Canada just has to make best efforts to do that. It really retains a lot of final decision making, and that's not negotiable. So there's some real questions around the enforceability of Canada's approach. So summing up, Canada does propose a regional plan, and the implementation of really what is a Canada-defined framework. The First Nations leadership in the regions can help shape what that implementation looks like on their region on some issues. But it's largely a recommendation-based relationship with First Nations advising Canada. Loving Justice takes a different approach, which is First Nations define national minimum standards that are in alignment with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and enforceable governance and human rights supervision to prevent discrimination from recurring or to address ongoing discrimination by Canada. So that's kind of our summary on regional agreements. Again, we really recommend that you, in your region, take a look at what's best for you. And yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks to Dr. Blackstock for providing that video presentation for us to have here. I just want to go, we will take some questions now. We have a little bit of time left, but first I will remind everybody that our next webinar will be on funded, and that will be 2 weeks from now on March 13th. So we do have I do have a couple of questions here that I will ask, and I'm going to actually ask. I see Richard is here, as well as Chief Erica Beaudin. If you come back online, Chief, and I'm going to start with the questions for the little bit amount of time. I'll direct my first question here to Richard. What happens after 5 years if this is not resolved?
Thanks for the prayer today, Karen, and the presentations from Cindy and Chief Beaudin. Great question. I would refer the person who asked the question to look at the Loving Justice Plan, pages 49 to 51. So the Loving Justice Plan basically promotes that we do seek continued guidance from the tribunal following a dispute and complaint. So we're asking the tribunal to retain jurisdiction over the complaint in relation to CFS for a minimum of 5 years from the date of the long-term reform order, and thereafter until Canada has demonstrated sustained compliance with the CFS reforms and the risk of recurrence of discrimination has been eliminated. During that period as well, hopefully the complainants in Canada will be able to agree on an effective dispute resolution as part of the CFS reforms. And if the complainants in Canada can't agree on something, then they will only return to the tribunal for assistance following the full adjudication of a dispute using that mechanism. As well, subject to Canada's compliance with CFS reforms following the 5-year review, the complainants in Canada shall report to the tribunal regarding the initial 5-year term and seek guidance and direction regarding the tribunal's ongoing jurisdiction in relation to CFS. So I hope that provides some clarity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Richard. I will direct the next question. I have 2 more questions that we have time for here. I'll direct the next question to Tracy. If we were not able to go back to the CHRT, is this not against our human rights once again?
Thanks, Karen. So there are two ways of going back to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. One is, the easy pathway where the tribunal retains jurisdiction over this particular case, and the complainants are able to go back to the tribunal to ask for additional orders in this same case. That is the easiest way of going back to the tribunal and the fastest way. And that's why the Loving Justice Plan wants to maintain that as an option for at least 5 years, as Richard was describing, and until it's clear that the discrimination really has ended. It's true that everyone always has the right to go back to the tribunal, but once this particular case is settled, that would require starting a new case. And as we know, that takes years and years. In this particular case, the complaint was filed in 2007, and the actual hearings didn't start until 2013, and the first decision didn't come out until 2016. So it takes a really long time to start a new case, to get a new case going. There's never any guarantee that a new complaint would actually go to a hearing to be adjudicated. And that's why it's really important to maintain the jurisdiction of this tribunal until it's very clear that the discrimination has ended.
Chief Beaudin, do you have any comments on either of those questions? Because we are running out of time and I have probably about 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. I think that I want to first of all thank everybody who has attended this morning. It really shows across the board how much our children really mean to us. And we as commissioners are only the voices. And we need your voice to assist us in ensuring that we have the best and the most robust plan that we possibly can for our children and families, our most vulnerable children and families. In regards to the questions about the CHRT, that was an immediate red flag to many of us as rights holders, myself being a chief, when we saw the initial plan that was presented to us. The elimination in this regard to the CHRT was probably the largest indicator for us that if we did not have the CHRT, because Canada continues to take the the rulings back to court, or else not to fulfill them, which requires us to go back to the CHRT. So if currently we are having those types of issues in current CHRT rulings, the hugest red flag is in whose best interest is it to eliminate the CHRT, especially if we do not have an agreed upon mechanism that has either equal or greater authority, more expedient authority to make decisions on behalf of our children and families, which are, again, apart from us as rights holders. So that being the case, that is one of the greatest. We want there to be a transition. We don't want our plan to be, okay, we want to instantly put in something that we as rights holders in our plan, what we imagine to be the best plan, and we have the answers right away. No, it is going to come through data. It's going to come through us working through, the first 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the case is, in order for us to do the best for our children. Therefore, we do require the CHRT and their involvement until we are satisfied that there is a mechanism that has greater or equal authority or expediency in the best interests of our children and families. And that is our best way to protect our children and families that we can see. So thank you for that, Karen.
Miigwech to our panelists, and miigwech for providing those answers once again. So I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining, all my relations. Thank you. Please look forward to the next couple of weeks here. On March 13th, we'll have the next one, and it'll be all our webinars are available on the NCCC website, as well as Our Children Our Way. We thank Our Children Our Way once again. I just want to close us off in a prayer, so please join me. Join us as in your own way as we close today. We give thanks for this time that we had together. We give thanks to the Creator for hearing us today and guiding us as we move forward. We pray for those getting ready for our spring and summer ceremonies. May their prayers be lifted to the spirits. We pray for each other and our loved ones. We give thanks for having woke up this morning and smelled the fresh, crisp air that the Creator gave us. We pray for our little ones and our lost ones and that they come home to us. Hi, miigwech, mercy chow, masi. Be safe out there and take care of each other, everyone.